start. We're going to start with a project intro to the lab messaging community. So there is a um, Confluence page for it that kind of gives an overview. We've been around for quite a while. We used to meet Thursdays from 12 to 1, but then at some point eTour came along and we had to push it. So now we're meeting an hour earlier, but it's still on Thursdays. The uh, left hand navigation pane is organized similar to how we're organized. We have a list of files, some reference documentation, the meeting notes. They are not nicely organized yet, so I can work on that. And then the specimen cross-mapping table, which basically explains all the different elements that we're capturing, and then this is providing a mapping to where they are in V2 versus FHIR. Obviously, we haven't quite finished that. We should probably also add the CDA to it, though it's probably not as often used, at least not in the US. But if we wanted to, have it more internationally recognized, we probably should add that. Obviously, this is a work in progress because we haven't quite copied everything in here. But the main topic of the lab community of practice right now is the specimen cross-mapping table, which is working on mapping individual single terms that are very pre-coordinated into the respective SNOMED hierarchies for the type, meaning what is being collected versus the source site, where it's collected from. And for both of those, there's modifier elements that are available. So for a type, for example, it could be the modifier. It could be whether it's acute or convalescent serum. If it's not pre-coordinated, it could be in SNOMED, they have lesions, but they don't have the different morphological abnormalities for the lesion. So whether it's a boil or a pustule or a pustule or, all those different awful things, those would go in the modifier. And then for the body side, obviously there's topographical relationships, so left and right arm, or ventral, caudal, or lateral, central, all those kind of things would go in there. There is attributes for specimen additives, and then there's attributes for the collection method. And so those are the kinds of things we're mapping to. That's why it's called the cross-mapping table. And we started it by collecting elements from what public health labs had and what the public health agencies had. We've then also got the concepts used by some of the reference labs like Quest and LabCoP and Mayo. And we've organized them into domains. So whether it's anatomic pathology or micro or a blood bank. And for each of those domains, we've then identified whether that particular specimen type is a preferred specimen or a discouraged specimen or even a do not use specimen. And when we were mapping between the concepts that are in the HL70487 table, that's the V2 vocabulary for specimen type, we realized that that table doesn't have definitions. It just has a name for the concept. And so some concepts, the names are not self-explanatory. If your concept is site, what does that mean for a specimen type, right? So we added a definition, and as part of the definition, we also included references to collection methods or things like that if they were available. So all that data is in that specimen cross-mapping table. The working copy is a Excel spreadsheet, which means if one specimen type is used in multiple domains, it'll be two rows in there or three, however many domains there are. Um, and so we have a database that's the back end for this to capture those different relationships and the different uses and things. And we're kind of trying to figure out how to publish it and make it accessible for everybody. As part of that process, we also are or have gotten it reviewed by different professional societies like CAP, the College of American Pathologists for the anatomic pathology terms, and ASM for the micro terms. Um, and I think we're in the final cleanup, and Amy is the master of the database, and Christina is helping her out. So we're working through the last couple of mappings that we have issues with, either because there's no SNOMED concepts available. So the last couple of sessions we've been spending with John Snyder, who was at the National Library of Medicine until last week or 2 weeks ago, in getting any terms that we needed to submit so that we could finish the mapping organized. So now we have to learn the new person to get that done. But we're hoping to be pretty close and done with this. I don't know, Amy, maybe end of this year. Can we hope for that? I'm
Fingers
hoping for that.
crossed. Yeah.
Yeah.
Have
So
you heard anything more about the database from your side?
no, it should be back up, I think. I'll double check on that.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. I will reach out, make sure it's reinstated and whatever they needed to do from a setup perspective. I don't remember.
Okay.
I'll email you. So that's the lab community of practice. We also, deal with other issues. So when USCDI came out originally, we worked on writing the submission for specimen type and for uh, the arguments. We were discussing arguments for why specimen collection date time might be important. So trying to convince ONC to actually elevate it from level 0 to at least level 2 because it's widely implemented. But ideally bringing it into USCDI, and then any other topics that come up. We keep an eye on the work that there's a group in HL7 Europe that's working on specimen related vocabulary and laboratory related vocabulary for the lab result reporting IGs that they have. And so we're trying to keep up with what they're doing and helping them out. So that's kind of, but in general, it's a venue for anybody who's doing lab data exchange to bring up a topic to find the right people to help work on it. Any questions on the lab COP? Okay. And then I'm going to go to Shield. So that's the other project we're going to talk about today. And I'm going to let it load because I need to always read what SHIELD stands for. So this is what SHIELD stands for, the Systemic Harmonization and Interoperability Enhancement for Laboratory Data. SHIELD is much easier. So it's a public-private partnership of quite a few organizations that's across the board of anybody that basically deals with laboratory tests. And the mission is to describe the same test the same way anywhere in the healthcare ecosystem. So it came out of some cross-federal agency meetings at NLM. 2015, I think, was the first workshop. And that workshop included people from CDC and FDA and NLM and LOINC and IVD vendors and APHL and Quest and LabCorp. and some others. I think maybe Arab was there. It was a pretty big meeting. And basically the idea was, or out of that meeting, the discussion was around, making sure the loin codes truly describe the test that is being reported about. And so we discussed some of the issues around LOINC at the time. And also um, the suggestion was made then that, the manufacturers know their test best. And so they really should be the ones proposing LOINC codes. And so from that meeting, the IVD vendors formed an organization called the IVD Industry Interconnectivity Consortium, or IICC, and they went off and created a an IHE profile um, that describes the HL7 messaging that people should be using from an instrument to the LIS. That's the IHE-LAW work, and that's been published for a while now, and it's become the CLSI Auto 16 standard, which is going to get updated here later this year. Um, and that was the first thing. So now the instruments can carry the loin code when they provide the result to the LIS back. But also um, they that same organization sat down after they developed that and created the LIVIT file, the LOINC to IVD test mapping file format, which initially is a Excel spreadsheet and a proprietary JSON format that describes or allows them to identify their IVD test and those elements about that test that determine the LOINC code assignments. And so they came up with this format, and some vendors are actually publishing their LOINC to IVD mappings publicly. Some vendors have using this format, but they only publish it or share it with their customers. And then there's, of course, a lot of IVD vendors that don't use it. And most of you all know about the LIVIT file from the COVID pandemic because HHS mandated that the LOINC codes shall come from that LIVIT file. So that's one of the things Christina is working on, is maintaining that SARS-CoV-2 LIVIT file and a couple other ones that have been added over the years to it. So out of that initial meeting at NLM, Shield was formed kind of like more informally, but we did come up with the name for it. And then during the pandemic, obviously, there was a need to make it a much more formal organization. So we spent almost a year doing that, doing the administrivia of becoming an official FDA collaborative community with a charter and all of those things. So you can find all of those things over here on the left. So we have the different use cases that a Shield can apply to. We have links to all the standards that are related to lab data in general. We have a glossary of the terms we're using and the file list as usual. We have supporting documentation, which is our community charter and our standing rules. We have a roadmap. So that was the other thing we did right after the pandemic, is to come up with a roadmap of how are we getting everybody to the place where the same test really is described the same way, regardless of where in the healthcare ecosystem it's documented. And to that end, we have working groups that cover those areas of the roadmap. So the first one, and the one that's near and dear to my heart, is the laboratory interoperability data registry, or repository. So we're still arguing a little bit about what this R stands for. But it's basically the idea is basically taking what started with LIVIT and make it bigger. So because during the pandemic, the original livid file has an attribute for specimen because that affects the system hierarchy in LOINC, but it doesn't have a way to codify those, and they need to be SNOMED encoded, and so or ideally SNOMED encoded, and so we Jimmy rigged it and put them all into the one cell, and it's not ideal, but it's usable for human consumption and people reading it. But it really should be more formalized. During the COVID pandemic, there were other groups that read the package inserts of all the IVD tests that came out for other reasons. So, for example, to understand the cross-reactivity with other SARS-CoV-2, SARS viruses or coronaviruses, um, or to understand the efficacy of the test, or to understand the actual target, which of the antigens was targeted, or which of the DNA genes was targeted if it was a PCR. So so all of those kind of things that might be important to understand the test, its efficacy and its use, um, should be in leader, we think. So that's kind of where we are right now. So this group has finished writing a white paper. The steering committee is currently reviewing it. Um, and then there's also a group that was funded through some high-tech money that the FDA got, to build an authoring environment for this leader, the repository. And so we're working on a pilot with bioMérieux um, to build this proof of concept leader thing. And then there's meetings all throughout here for that working group. We have a standards, updates, and vocabulary working group that basically looks at all the standards used around lab tests, and which specific projects they want to tackle. So bioMérieux submitted quite a few around coding for qualitative lab results, for microorganisms, for susceptibility testing, and so on. Um, so they tackle those one at a time. We have an IVD data hub, which is unlike the laboratory, the leader repository, which is about the kind of tests. So this describes the functionality of a test system has, versus the IVD data hub. This is patient level, specimen level data about, for each of those tests that you could find information about in leader. And this is kind of really what FDA wants to see happening. And this is what might help the IVD vendors get their test to market faster, deal with post-surveillance review, help researchers, all of those kind of things. So that's what that group is working on. I think they found a partner that actually has a working data hub, but we're not funded, so and that partner's only interested if we could pay for their services. So we kind of have to figure out how we're going to move on next. And right now we don't have federal agency participation in that particular work group. They're not back yet, so it's kind of on hold right now. We have an international alignment working group. Obviously, we have a pretty strong U.S. focus because of the involvement of the federal agencies, but the IVD vendors are worldwide. So specifically, bioMérieux keeps bringing us back to the international aspect of things. We have a communications and branding work group that's actually meeting, and they're kind of helping us create elevator pitches. They created our web presence on LinkedIn. They've set up our Gmail account. And they're kind of looking for conferences to submit abstracts to. The other ones are not um, working right now. So there's a toolsmiths working group kind of thinking about, what kind of tooling would we need around these things, like for leader. So part of the people that would be in the toolsmiths working group are, participating on the leader pilot. And then there's the evaluation and feedback loops. How do you know something is working well? So we don't really have anybody to head that up. So it's kind of sitting on hold. And same with the implementation and quality working group. So, once one of these things is actually live, we could test and see, are people using it? How are they using it? What can we make better? So that's kind of where we are. And then, since we're Shield and a big group, and part of the group is EHR vendors that are affected by certification, we do pay attention to any entries in the Federal Register that affect lab data. And so for any of these, we do try to do a review and try to provide feedback. Because the Shield Steering Committee has to approve everything, sometimes that step doesn't get done in time. So then official feedback is not submitted, but the feedback's still being collated. So people could still read it, even if it's not officially submitted. Um, anyway, that's Shield. Any questions on Shield? We have two main calls. The All Shield call is the fourth Tuesday of every month from 12 to 1. That's usually like an update call. And then the second Tuesday of the month, also from 12 to 1, is the special topic call. So we used to have, and I can go there here if it's meeting notes. So if we go like to this year's Shield calls, the All Shield calls are linked from here. And then the special topic calls are um, are listed here. Like we were supposed to get a update of the lab interoperability panel from December, but this was in the communication pause phase, so we repurposed that to work on draft comments. Or we got an intro to the Loinc-SNOMED ontology work. This was one we canceled the call for, but pushed people to attend that instead. Um, so and these are all on the pages here. These are at least the slides are available for all the recent ones. For the 2024 calls, they're all recorded, and all the older calls pre-2025 are all recorded. So for the special topic call, so if you're interested in trying to find out more about some of these things, like how stuff is done in the UK or in the Netherlands, cancer synoptic reporting, things like that. You can go into each one of these and listen to the recording. Any questions? Okay, I'm going to stop the recording.
I have a question, Ricky.
Oh, yeah, sure.
So for like the participants, I guess for both Shield and the lab community of practice, like, is there a lot of overlap between the two and between participants in other organizations like HL7?
Yeah. Yeah, there's quite a bit of overlap. It's and especially for the LabCoP, I think our participation is pretty small right now because we're so focused on the cross-mapping table, and quite a few people that have originally participated and provided content just don't have the time to, commit to doing the detail work. So there's usually like 6 or 7 of us that are working on this. Some, but we always have lab SME participation. If we don't, we kind of don't work on work on those aspects. We might work on the coding specific aspects. We were fortunate, for the longest time that John Snyder from NLM participated in it, so that we have direct SNOMED modeling expertise on hand. Andrea Pickus usually participates, and she's on the LOINC lab committee, so we get some LOINC modeling expertise on that side as well as her laboratory experience. And obviously, most of those are also participating in SHIELD, and then on the SHIELD side, what's interesting is that what's really important on the SHIELD side is kind of getting or looping in more of the federal partners. So obviously at the LabCoP, because it's co-chaired by a CDC person, we have CDC participation, but we don't have FDA, for example. And we don't have IVD vendors right now, because they're not necessarily interested in the specimen cross-mapping table of details. But I think, the value SHIELD brings over HL7 is that it elevates it to a higher topic, right? HL7 is looking at it from how do we transport this data between people or actors and organizations. But SHIELD is looking at it from a more global perspective, from the healthcare ecosystem perspective, right? So we're looking at how does it look from an IVD vendor perspective? How does it look from a laboratory user perspective, from an LIS vendor perspective, from an EHR vendor perspective? So we're trying to shine the light on the same problem pretty much, only from the different angles in SHIELD, whereas HL7 looks at it from, okay, so here are the data elements, somebody tells me need to get moved. How do I do that? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Thank you for elaborating on that.
Sure. Other question? Let's stop.